Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's top 10 most underrated tames. In at number 10 is the Angler. Now this thing was released way back, and I do definitely fondly remember this thing from Squid's old Ark series, and his last episode on the Bongoman's Island map was taming the anglerfish, and still to this day this is actually a pretty useful creature for some certain specific Ark tasks, especially with their silica pearl gathering abilities, and that is pretty much all they have going for them. But silica pearls, if you didn't know already, are an extremely useful Ark resource, so that is why they are an extremely useful Ark creature which many people don't talk or even tame at all, and they just don't question it as a creature. They'll always go for something else. And yes, there are better sea creatures out there, but the Angler is great earlier on to mid-game stages in Ark, where you can't fully shell out for the most powerful ocean tames, but you still want to farm all of those silica pearls to get your fabrication up to the max. These creatures are really worth the tame at some point, as they aren't difficult at all, and they are extremely useful for gathering up all of those silica pearls. In at number 9 is the Chalicotherium. Now you may think this creature is just utterly useless, or you may think this creature is an absolutely insane tame and 100% worth it. And I'm kind of leaning more onto that side, as this creature does have a lot of abilities which many other creatures don't have. And also, the Chalicotherium has an absolutely insane knockback attack, and it is just a generally good creature for just dealing a lot of damage. It's a bit like a slightly worse Megatherium, which really does pack a punch, and it actually is a very decent travel mount as well. It has a very respectable speed stat, one of what you will not complain with at all, and it does have a wealth of other abilities as well, like it being able to throw literal rocks of, I think, even feces at the enemy player. But this ability will take some time to actually practice and get right, as it is a somewhat difficult ability to control, but when done right, it is a really fun, cool ability which does have many uses as well, as it essentially makes this thing a long-range fighting dinosaur, which many other Ark creatures simply do not have. The only one I can really think of off of hand is the Vellonosaur's turret ability. In at number 8 is the Carbenemies. Now I know this will be a somewhat unpopular opinion among many of you, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, I really do enjoy the Carbenemies in the early stages of my Ark playing. In those early stages, it is extremely useful to get yourself a creature that can grind all of that oil and those silica pearls and all of those underwater resources. Yes, I will definitely agree this isn't the best creature out there to gather all of those berries and just harvest general things, as I'm pretty sure this thing can't even gather berries, but if it can, it is still an extremely slow Ark creature, which isn't great on land at all. But when it comes into the water, the Carbenemies does actually have some reasonable speed. And yes, just for reference, this B-roll does have some boosted speed on the Carbenemies, as I think it just looks really funny, and it definitely is really funny in my opinion. Comment down below if you think a really fast Carbenemies waggling its little legs really quickly is funny. You know, some people do, and I'm definitely one of those people. But yes, as you can see here in the B-roll, this is me going to gather some oil from the kind of depths of the ocean. Not obviously right to the bottom, as that wouldn't be great, as your player would simply run out of oxygen. As the time when you're getting the Carbenemies, you will not have the scuba tank. I'm pretty confident you won't. So yeah, you can always go into those lakes and lower lying rivers, and there you'll find some oil and definitely some silica pearls, and that is where I think the Carbenemies really shines the most. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now I know loads of people on my channel really do not feel as if the Beelzebufo is underrated, and they extremely love this creature, and they think it is one of the most popular Ark creatures. And among quite a lot of Ark players, the Beelzebufo is definitely very popular for its cementing paste gathering abilities. But the fact is, a lot of Ark players as well simply discount the Beelzebufo, and I was one of them before I tried it, as they will just simply say beaver dams are the most efficient way to gather cementing cementing paste, and there isn't a point of spending all of that time to get yourself one of these absolutely amazing, charming Ark frogs, which now obviously I've turned my opinion over is simply not the case. In insect caves like the one on the island, the Beelzebufo really does shine, and you can gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. And with Ark being a buggy game as well, sometimes beaver dams don't even spawn and can be an absolute nuisance to find, so knowing that you can literally just find some insects on a Beelzebufo to get that cementing paste is actually extremely useful as well, where you just can't find beaver dams and you just can't find that cementing paste. The Beelzebufo is definitely the best creature out there for reliable, quick cementing paste gathering. In at number 6 is the Castoroides. Now again, you may be kind of on the edge like the Beelzebufo with this creature, as you may either love it or hate it. These creatures do seem to be quite Marmite creatures, as you may just not see the use in taming a Castoroides. But before you have the chainsaw in Ark, the Castoroides is one of the best creatures for gathering wood. And you all know wood is a resource which you will need a lot of throughout the game, right from the beginning all the way to the end stages of the Ark game. You will need all of that wood. The amount of wood that you will need in one Ark map playthrough is absolutely insane, and the Beaver will really help you to actually get you there. And also the Beaver is an extremely fast creature as well, and great in the water too, so it is a sort of upgrade to the carb enemies if you still can't get a creature that is underwater capable that actually spawns in the water, like the Megalodon or Ichthyosaurus or Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus, which you may not have at the stage when you'll be taming these things. And also on top of that, they have an extra little special spicy ability as well, which makes them really nice to use. The fact is, their saddle is just a really nice portable smithy, extremely useful. In at number 5 is the Spinosaurus, and what a creature this is, and also in my opinion, what an underrated carnivore, as the Rex always seems to take the spotlight away from the Spinosaurus. And in my opinion, the Spinosaurus is pretty much what a Rex is, and in some cases it can be easier to tame, as it does spawn in less hostile environments, and it definitely has a lot of really great uses that the Rex simply can't partake in. Firstly, it has a really amazing turning circle, which the Rex simply can't compete with, as it can turn 360 on the spot, whereas the Rex's turning circle is absolutely atrocious, and in many situations it is so bad you can even get your Rex killed because it can't turn around and attack the creature that is attacking by its feet. Also, the Spinosaurus is great in the water too, and I'm pretty sure it does have an oxygen stat, even though it may not as well. I'm kind of a bit in between. It may have had one in the past and now it doesn't. Either way, its oxygen stat is really great, and it is a great underwater creature with creatures like the Baryonyx, the Mosasaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the Basilosaurus. The list literally goes on for underwater creatures, and unlike most underwater creatures and pretty much every creature apart from this and the Shadowmane, it has the hydration buff, so it will do even more damage when in water, which is just simply great, as with any carnivore you always like to have a buff. Sadly, it does not have the bleed ability, but still, that hydration buff is absolutely OP, and when it goes back onto its hind legs, this thing will do even more damage on top of that. It is definitely a great boss creature, and actually overall, I'm pretty sure it does more damage than the Rex, as it can attack faster, and I think its damage stat is higher. Its only real downside is its health is slightly worse than something like a Rex. In at number 4 is the Baryonyx. Now, this creature is definitely one of my favorites, and one creature that I will never forget in my Ark journey, and I'm surprised that so many other people don't talk about this to the extent that I do. And yes, it is not the most underrated creature out there, but I definitely think every single Ark player should have a Baryonyx in their roster of creatures, and they should know how to tame one effectively, efficiently, and know how to use one effectively as well. Yes, Shadowmanes are really great for caves now, but still the Baryonyx is my go-to 100%, as obviously its size means that this thing can fit into pretty much any cave. and compared to the Shadowmane, I'm just more used to using the Baryonyx, and yes, it may not be quite as versatile in terms of travel. In my opinion, this thing is still extremely useful and deserves a use, even though in some cases it is somewhat overtaken by the Shadowmane. Except the Shadowmane doesn't have the secret little ability that the Baryonyx has hidden up its sleeve. When it's in the water, it can literally stun creatures if you press C. And yes, the Shadowmane may have the hydration buff and things like that. The Shadowmane is a really great creature, don't get me wrong. It's just for things like caving and underwater exploration, I will always go Baryonyx before Shadowmane. And I would urge you to do that too. And also, they are a lot more accessible than the Shadowmane, as they do spawn on the island. Yes, I know the Shadowmane can be found on Fjorda, at least I'm pretty sure it can be found on Fjorda. So it is free to every Ark player out there, apart from Switch, I think doesn't have Fjorda yet, and obviously mobile doesn't. But on spawning on the island, it really does mean that this creature is the most accessible that it can be. Definitely worth the tame. In at number 3 is the Allosaurus. Yet again, another carnivore, which some people again may say they use all the time. But I really think the Allosaurus does not get the press that it really deserves, like the Spinosaurus and the Bary, as the Allo is by far one of the best boss creatures in Ark in general. And yes, the Rex may have more health, but the Allosaurus does an extremely immense amount of damage in packs, and it is just by far one of the most useful combat creatures in Ark. And with its pack buff, which obviously it will get from being in a pack, it can be buffed even more than a Rex can. And if you combine that with UT buffs on top of that, and the Daedon healing everything, you can have yourself a really great boss environment with Allos. And if you do breeding and mutations, you can have yourself an absolutely insane pack of Allos. And they don't tend to be as absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid as a Rex. These things will pretty much never get stuck on anything in the Ark terrain. And also, if you're doing the Overseer on the island, I would probably recommend bringing Allos, as getting through the tech cave with Rexes, just those Rexes, man, they will just get stuck in the lava and they will just die, and they'll just fall in the most stupid places, and it is really infuriating trying to retrieve them. So I will always use something like the Allo or the Spino if I'm feeling like it for the Overseer boss on the island. And I've only used Rexes once, and I completely regret it, as pretty much all of my army was killed in the tech cave, as all of the Rexes just decided, I don't want to live anymore, and I'm just going to jump straight into that lava. But obviously the Allo does not have any of those issues, and unlike the Rex, it has the all famous bleed ability. Definitely a carnivore to be proud and worth taming. In at number 2 is the Mantis. Now again, this is one of Ark's most accessible creatures, with this thing spawning on maps like Ragnarok. And yes, albeit it may not have the easiest taming method out there, requiring you to passive feed it woolly rhino horns on Ragnarok, or you can use Deathworm horns as well, and you will have to use Deathworm horns on the original map that it came on, which is Scorched Earth. And I get that many people do recognize the Mantis out there, but like the others, I really think everyone should have a Mantis in their roster, as some people may think it's just weak, useless, not worth it. Why even bother with all the prep and all of that just effort to get yourself some really good Mantises? And to that, I would say they are extremely great harvesters, and on a map like Ragnarok, these are by far the go-to creature for gathering all of that mutton up. And they're definitely really fun harvesters to use as well. And pretty much any melee weapon that you can think of, apart from tech melee weapons, I'm pretty sure, these things will be able to wield and use to such a high level of ability. The only real downside to using a Mantis with your tools is the durability factor to it. But if you have Ascendant tools, then you'll have a really great time, as those weapons are not going to break as often. The Mantis is definitely a tame every Ark player should have in their roster, and one every Ark player should tame, and in my opinion, it doesn't get the support that it actually really needs. And finally, in at number 1 is the Carnotaurus. Now, many people wouldn't have expected this thing to be in the number 1 slot, but in my opinion, the Carno is my favourite carnivore in Ark. Yes, I prefer it even above the Baryonyx. The amount of nostalgia I have with this creature and the amount of success I've had with this creature is absolutely insane. And when I did Genesis 1 for the first time, I beat the Master Controller, albeit on Gamma, with the Carnotauruses, and it went extremely well, and it was an extremely fun and useful boss fight for me to have. The Carnotauruses are actually a very viable boss creature, albeit they won't do what a Rex, a Spino, or an Allo can. They are still a really good middleman for doing those Gamma boss fights, and you can definitely push for Beta and Alpha depending on what the fight is, just maybe not with the Master Controller. And did you also know that Carnotaurus, translated from Latin into English, means meatball, which is why I always call my Carnotauruses meatball, partly because it sounds funny, but also it is just accurate to what Carnotaurus actually means. Also, since the Carnotaurus' release, this thing has been TLC'd, now having a second attack where it will headbutt the enemy creature and deal that all-famous bleed ability, which only one other creature on this list so far, being the Allosaurus, actually has. And again, this is something that something like the Spino or the Rex doesn't have, which is why it is extremely useful to have yourself a Carnotaurus, and as always, call this thing Carny Dave. In at number 10 is the Rhinognatha. Now, ever since this thing released, this has been an absolute boom in any Ark PvP player's life, and it has just been used so much to absolutely decimate PvP bases with its wealth of abilities and the fact they can pick up creatures like Rexes and just steal loads and loads of enemy creatures during raids. And at this point, the Rhinognatha has become a bit of a problem in the PvP Ark space, as it is just so much more OP than pretty much every other creature in the game for that one specific use case, that it just now is just really unbalanced. And many people are questioning why this will be in ASA from day one, since Ark is kind of going for a bit more of a primitive theme now, and it is definitely leaning further towards that. And again, tech will be at the start of ASA 2, but that doesn't mean the Rhinognatha is a bad creature at all, and I can say that for all of the creatures on this list actually, as all of these creatures on this list are good creatures. It's just I think they are overused a bit too much. But I would say largely the taming method is pretty fair, but I would say in future, definitely Wildcard should debuff this thing, as right now it is just so unbalanced and it is so OP for PvP, which could be a good thing to quite a lot of people, but it is also a really bad thing, as you do want a lot of balance in those scenarios, as those alphas of the server are just going to get themselves a Rhinognatha and absolutely decimate everyone else on the server, so no one else can actually have a good time. In at number 9 is the Pteranodon. Now again, the Pteranodon is a great creature, but I think largely it is overused a lot for a lot of things, and yes, it does fit those use cases very well, especially for raids in PvP, but in my opinion there are better flyers out there that if you just put a little bit more effort into, you will have a significantly better flyer. The Crystal Wyvern is one for an example. Yes, you do need to get up to level 65 instead of 38 to ride that, but it is a much better tame, and if you do a very basic note run, you can get there pretty quickly and it won't really be too much of an effort. Definitely something I would recommend. Even though other maps do not have Crystal Wyverns, if you're on Crystal Isles, definitely give that a shot. But on other maps as well, sometimes I just skip the Pteranodon altogether and just save up for an RG or a Tapijara. Just a flyer which I will actually appreciate much more, as in a PvE scenario, after you've got the RG, the Pteranodon pretty much just becomes obsolete, as the Tapijara can be your faster flyer there, or you could use something like the Pelagornis maybe, and obviously the RG is just going to be that 100% utility dino. the RG is an absolute insane dino for utility, and definitely a good one, and definitely another overused creature as well. But I say the Pteranodon still fits into that category too, as it does seem to be a creature which every Ark player does go for, but for good reason. But I do think there are some other flyers out there in Ark which can be tamed relatively early on in your Ark playing progress that will give you a much nicer experience than the Pteranodon. Next up is the Carnotaurus. Now you can probably tell what I would say this thing is an overused creature. This thing is an absolutely insane beast of a carnivore. Obviously loads of players are going to use it, and again there aren't too many other options than the Carnotaurus for a creature of this size and skill level. But largely, I still think it is a bit of an overrated and overused dino, as it can't be used for bosses on every map. You'll need a creature like the Rex for that. And on Extinction, yes, it may be one of the best creatures out there for doing bosses, but just largely, it isn't a very useful creature, apart from, obviously, that combat. But again, I need to stress this enough, that does not mean it is a bad tame. And don't feel bad if you have tamed a Carnotaurus, because I'm saying it is overrated in a way. Obviously, it's overused, but it's still a very viable creature. And compared to a creature like the Rhinognatha, it isn't as imbalanced in a PvP scenario, but definitely still extremely OP, as once it's in its blood rage, this thing will just rip through so many things and can definitely be a bit of an unbalance. And actually, I would like to see some less OP creatures in Ark in the future, as currently it just seems like we're getting loads of OP creatures and Ark is gradually getting even more unbalanced. Next up, we have the Giga, and again this follows the same trail of thought as the Carnotaurus. This is a big carnivore, which yes is great on Extinction, but you can't take it into all of those boss fights. And overall, I would say the Giga is a worse creature than the Carnotaurus, as it's slower, its stamina is worse, and obviously it has that blood rage. And it doesn't even have a bleed ability. Yes, wild ones do, but once tamed, it will lose that ability. And this was definitely a great creature back in 2016. And it added some absolute OPness to the game. That is definitely a very weird thing to say. OPness, insane, absolutely insane phrase. But either way, the Giganotosaurus is an extremely big carnivore. Again, a very good one, but by many is extremely overused, especially in the PvP space. That is obviously partly just because there isn't too many other creatures like this apart from the Carnotaurus. But in my opinion, the Gigas are used a lot, like a lot, and there are some other creatures which can be extremely useful for the tasks that the Giga will do as well. And it can make everyone's Ark playing a bit better, especially those ones who are struggling a bit along the way, and they are just being absolutely decimated every day by the alphas of the server on Gigas or Carnotauruses. So overall, yes, Ark is a very unbalanced game, and the Giga and the Carnotaurus are definitely factors within that. Now, the Deinonychus. This is again an extremely useful creature which I do urge you to tame. But again, fitting into that PvP Ark theme, this creature is extremely overused for so many things. And again, there are some other creatures which you can use instead of this. And it is also partly just because of how OP these creatures are, except they aren't quite as OP as the Giga or Carnotaurus, even though their bleed ability does work extremely well on bosses. But obviously, unlike when the Raptor had that pounce ability, which luckily was removed, but apart from on Arboration for some reason, yeah, that was extremely more worse than what the Deinonychus has to its name. But the Deinonychus, in my opinion, is still a very overused creature, and obviously for good reason. It's an extremely versatile creature. It can just travel really fast. It's a really nice creature. It inflicts a good amount of damage. It is just great at traversing across the map. But I do feel like now it's like, oh, the Deinonychus, and people just go on about it for ages, and I do go on about it quite a lot as well. but the Deinonychus, in my opinion, is quite overused, and I would like to see some other creatures of similar role to the Deinonychus that other Ark players out there can use, as it can really spice up the gameplay, as again, just playing as the same creature every single time can get really boring and makes Ark even more unbalanced than it already is. So in my opinion, the Deinonychus is a pretty overused dinosaur. In at number 5 is the Maywing, and yes, my favourite creature in Ark has been put into the overused category, as in my opinion the Maywing is an overused one. Obviously not one that I will stop using, but again, it is an extremely unbalanced creature as well, and hopefully some of these issues get fixed into ASA, and then all of them should be gone by the time Ark 2 hits, whenever that is. There may even be more delays past 2025. And again, the Maywing is a really great tame which you can find on maps like Gen 2 and Fjorda, and it will make your life significantly easy. But I think nowadays Ark life is just so easy that it is just so unbalanced, and creatures like this are overused so much, which makes Ark a much easier game, which is better for new players starting out. But when the transition to ASA hits, there will be a huge reality shock, as the game is said to be much harder as the AI is getting improved and other things like that. And also movement speed is being removed as well, so no insanely fast dinos zipping across the map, or your insanely fast, weirdly discombobulated character zooming across the beaches. Now, the Shadow Mane, an extremely useful creature, again found on Gen 2 and Fjorda. Like the Maywing, they did obviously originate from the same map, and in my opinion, this is an even more overused creature than the Maywing, and again is an extremely OP one, which has a wealth of really great abilities. Again, like the hydration buff, it has pack buff, it has alpha buff, it just has pretty much anything, and it can charge its attack up over time, and it can even stun creatures. The list of the Shadowmane's ability just goes on and on, and it is pretty much seemingly endless. The Shadowmane is again an extremely useful creature, one of which I urge you to tame at some point in Gen 2 or on Fjorda. Obviously you'll need to prepare for this a lot though, as the tame for the Shadowmane can be really annoying, and it is not an easy one, although some of you out there have said, the Shadowmane's a really easy tame, but especially for those people who haven't tamed a Shadowmane before, a Shadowmane is not an easy tame, but I do urge you to tame one at some point. In at number 3 is the Reaper. Now this creature is a significantly older one than the others that are found on this list, but also one which is extremely overused, obviously like all the other creatures which you will find on this list. And the Reaper is especially useful in PvP, as it is just a really fast, quick, agile creature that can just get the job done. It will deal all the damage necessary, it will absolutely decimate all of the creatures in the area. These things can easily take out Gigas, like no problems at all, and then they can just raid the base and then just get out. And again, it's leaning into Ark's balance again, as now with all of the transfers over many maps, the balance of Ark is definitely thrown off, and I wouldn't mind if you weren't able to transfer across maps, and the creatures on every map were built to be used on said map, and then it was so balanced for that map. Tell me down below if you agree with that, or you prefer to just transfer the most OP creatures over from other maps. Yet again, talking about Ark being an unbalanced game. But what would you expect? It has built up significantly since its release in 2015. All the way now, it's over 8 years old, which seems absolutely insane now. And yes, you can definitely see why it's an unbalanced game, but the Reaper is 100% a contributor to griefing on PvP. In at number 2 is the Rock Drake. Now obviously the Rock Drake is going to be an overused creature like the Reaper, but why is it more overused than the Reaper? And that is mainly just because this thing is significantly faster than the Reaper, and it is just more agile and more stealthy, which is why it is better for PvP than the Reaper, apart from just completely, absolutely decimating bases by brute force. And you'll see many people in the PvP space going around on rock drakes or managamas, so I'm kind of going to include the managama in the number 2 spot as well, kind of as a little honorable mention there, as the managama is an extremely used PvP tame, which is extremely overused. And the managama at this point is probably one of my least favorite tames because of how much it has been griefed on with PvP. But either way, back to the rock drake, like the managama, is just a stealthy, quick creature which can zip across the map with ultimate speed and just decimate everyone. And essentially, this creature, to all of the noobs out there, can just ruin your day completely. And obviously, it's meant to be a late game creature, but when you're interacting with other players on this thing and just absolutely griefing them, this thing is just so OP compared to anything they can imagine using, that the progress is pretty much just set back to naught for them, which is obviously why I'm not really an Ark PvP player, as I'm not really into the progression of just losing all my stuff and building back up again, even though I will say the combat is pretty fun. The Rock Drake is definitely an overused tame, which I wouldn't mind getting some sort of nerf in the future, but I'm sure many of you out there would be very unhappy with that. And finally, in at number 1 is the Rex. Now, what would you expect? The Rex is by far one of the most used Ark creatures out there, and definitely one at which every single Ark player will look up to when they start playing. The Rex, by far, is one of the most well-known dinosaurs out there, and it is no lie that many Ark players will go after the Rex because of just how cool they think it is. And it definitely is a very useful creature in the space of Ark, being one of the best for bosses, because unlike the Giga and the Carnotaurus, it can be let into bosses, and it is an extremely balanced creature with no kind of things that will make the creature rage or get out of control. It's got a great health stat, it's got a great melee stat, although its mobility and stamina and weight aren't great. You do not need that for combat. But by now, you can definitely tell why the Rex is an overused creature. If every Ark player started Ark and tamed a Rex, there would be a lot of Rexes that people would have tamed. And pretty much every Ark player that has started Ark and made significant progress, meaning that they've played probably at least an in-game week or in-game month of Ark, then they would have tamed a Rex at some point. And they're not really a difficult tame. They're widespread across pretty much all of Ark on every map, and they're just easy again, they're just quick. They're not very difficult, and they're not very expensive tames either, which is definitely why they are so popular and, in my opinion, extremely overused. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and comment down below 10 Ark creatures which you think are extremely overused, as I'd really like to hear your thoughts. And I will see you all later.